Welcome to my channel. Today we bring you another exciting episode of Boring History for Sleep. And today we're going to talk about why you wouldn't last a day in a Roman apartment. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We would love to have you. And do not forget to follow us on social media where you will find even more interesting facts from our videos. Plumbing, aqueducts, public transportation, and other features that made it much more livable than most cities today. Unfortunately, it also had the usual modern problems, like bad landlords, granting Honorius rule over the West and Arcadius control of the East. Unfortunately, none of the three brothers got along very well. Honorius was jealous of his brother's wealth and power, but most of them had no idea what lay ahead. He gave the defeated Christians a choice: convert to Islam or die. The survivors fled to the coastal city of Acre, where they held out for 2 years against Saladin's siege. But the French were ready for him and beat him back at the Battle of Adjie. A contemporary chronicler described it as the most horrible and dreadful slaughter that ever was heard of in our memory or in reading of any history thereof. Matched, the English dead included the famous warrior, Sir Thomas à Pin, who, according to legend, refused to yield his sword belt to the French, so the French beheaded him, then cut off his head and hung it from the top of an oak tree. His severed heart was roasted in a fire, his entrails were cast into a vessel of wine, and his flesh was served as a supper to the French nobility. His skull was mounted on a pike and used as a warning to other would-be English interlopers. Eventually, King Richard the Lionheart came to rescue them, but even he could not save the city. Richard negotiated a treaty with Saladin, agreeing to a 3-year truce and allowing safe passage for pilgrims to the Holy Land. But soon after, Richard returned to England. The truce was broken and the fighting began anew. When the Crusaders entered Nicaea in Asia Minor, they found a city unlike any they had ever seen before. It was huge, with towering walls and magnificent mosques and bazaars everywhere. To the Christians, it looked like the fabled city of Constantinople. And in the minds of the Crusaders, if Constantinople was Muslim, then the Pope must have gotten the wrong directions. And so they began to plunder the city. The sack of Nicaea became one of the most infamous episodes of the Crusades. But it wasn't the only time the Crusaders mistook a Byzantine city for the Holy Land. Later that same year, they captured the important city of Antioch, but once again fell victim to mass confusion. Crusaders seized the treasury and began looting the churches. The city's bishop was so horrified at what he was seeing that he grabbed a handful of gold coins and flung them into the street, crying out, "Woe is me, for we have sold our faith for gold." Arcadius was resentful of his brother's constant demands for money, and meanwhile, the youngest brother, Atticus, hated them both equally. The simmering animosity finally boiled over in 408. By 1248, Christian forces had taken back most of the Iberian Peninsula, but there were still a few pockets of Muslim resistance left in the south. In 1296, the last independent emirate agreed to a treaty with the Christian kings of Aragon and Castile, giving them nominal overlordship while allowing them to keep their independence. In return, the emirs agreed to pay tribute to their overlords and not attack Christian interests anywhere in the Mediterranean. Despite being nominally subjects of the crown, the Moors of Granada lived largely in peace with their Christian neighbors, and although the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella wanted to finish they knew that conquering Granada would cost too many lives and resources. Instead, they offered the Emirates ruler, Muhammad XII, a choice: convert to Christianity or leave Spain and take your head. But Muhammad chose a third option. He converted to Christianity, keeping his lands and titles. His court was given 3 months to convert to Christianity, but many of the nobles simply converted outwardly, while continuing to practice Islam in secret. When Ferdinand and Isabella entered Granada, they discovered what had happened and promptly expelled or executed every single one of these crypto-Jews. When Honorius sent a delegation to demand Arcadius pay his share of a massive ransom for 2,000 hostages held by the Byzantines. But instead of paying the ransom, Arcadius decided to start a war. He hired Alaric, the leader of the Visigoths, to invade Italy and sack Rome. The wealthy Romans who built these apartment complexes saw an opportunity to turn their investment properties into profit machines. The Hagia Sophia is widely considered one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed, and its influence can be seen in cathedrals all over Europe. Unfortunately, they were also responsible for the world's first "do not feed the animals" sign. In 532, a man named Belisarius arrived in Constantinople to take command of the imperial armies. He was a brilliant military commander who went on to win several key victories for the empire, including recapturing the lost province of Africa and conquering the Ostrogoths in Italy. But he was also a bit of a stickler for rules. One of his edicts was a ban on feeding the pigeons in the hippodrome because their droppings were getting everywhere and they were attracting rats. Naturally, this order was hugely unpopular with the local pigeon fanciers, which led to a series of angry protests. But Belisarius stood his ground and even had several men put to death for throwing rocks at his horse. So they crammed as many people as possible into their apartments. But sometimes those mosaics weren't quite accurate. After the Arab conquest of the Levant, Emperor Leo III, the Isaurian, commissioned a series of mosaics depicting historical battles. Unfortunately, the artists either didn't know what they were doing, or they were high. because these mosaics show a number of historically inaccurate details. For example, in one mosaic depicting the Battle of the River, European soldiers are shown wearing Arabic armor and using Another mosaic of a battle with the Persians shows Greek soldiers wearing distinctive Persian helmets called kula kurgi. They also seem to be holding various strange weapons like spears with multiple points or bows and arrows that seem to be made of stone. In another, we can see a soldier charging into battle with what appears to be a mace made of a metal ball on a chain, which looks suspiciously like a flail, a weapon invented centuries later by the Mongols. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given the amount of alcohol involved, Leo III eventually banned the production of wine within the city limits. According to a recent study, those apartments were some of the densest housing in the entire ancient world. Emperor Nero was Rome's 8th emperor, taking the throne at age 17 after the suicide of his father. Caligula's great-grandfather Augustus had adopted Gaius as his heir in 060, but the spoiled teenager spent his entire reign making everyone's life miserable. With the seat of power in the eastern half of the empire enjoyed a golden age of prosperity and peace. In fact, the army in the east got so bored with fighting wars that they stopped doing it. That is, except for one group of soldiers who stationed themselves right outside of town in a small camp near the river. There they built crude huts and settled down to raise pigs and chickens. One day, however, their boring existence was shattered when an invading Gothic tribe attacked and killed several of their comrades. This traumatic event inspired them to make one final stand against the invaders. Before abandoning their post, they died bravely in battle, but this defeat demoralized the Goths so much that they fled back across the Danube without putting up any further resistance, including his own. He chained women to chariots like horses and whipped them as they pulled him around. But by the time he reached his mid, he had murdered 4 of his 6 siblings and alienated himself from just about everyone else in the empire, including his own mother. Finally, in 54 AD, he was stabbed to death by his own grandmother, Julia Mies, at the behest of his great-grandfather, Augustus. Ancient Rome was the world's first truly modern city with purpose-built neighborhoods. Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into 2 halves, east and west. In 395 AD, Theodosius I split the Roman Empire between his 3 sons. The Byzantines were known throughout the medieval period for their incredible art and architecture. The Byzantine Empire was famous for its beautiful mosaics. In 1096, Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade to recapture the Holy Land from the Muslims. Thousands of European Christians answered the call when Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. The Spanish Reconquista was a long process. After 150 years of Anglo-French warfare, King Henry V of England arrived in 1415 to conquer France. Rome is one of the most important cities in the world. As the capital of Italy and one of the most popular tourist destinations, destroying 2/3 of the city and leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. So how did Rome burn to the ground? The Roman Empire stretched from Britain to Egypt and was home to around 50 to 70 million people. Rome itself was the most densely populated city in the entire empire, with an estimated population of around 1 million citizens within the city walls. But these were likely false. Instead, the fire may have been caused by a series of unfortunate events. There were rumors that it started accidentally in the central market area, perhaps due to a discarded cigarette or a carelessly managed campfire. Who was alive during the time of the fire? In these poems, it may have been a tragic accident, the work of art. It is important to remember that it was just one event in a long and complex history. The fire had a profound impact on the city of Rome and the Roman Empire, but it was not the sole cause of their decline and fall. Or it could have been a plot by Nero to get rid of his mother or to clear the way for his new palace. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks, but one thing is for sure. The fire had a profound impact on the history of Rome and the course of the Roman Empire. Tacitus described how Nero had started the fire in order to clear the way for the construction of his new palace. The city's population declined sharply and the economy suffered greatly. In addition, the fire led to the persecution of the Christians, which would only end with the legalization of Christianity in 313 AD. Nero's actions during and after the fire also contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. His persecution of the Christians created resentment among the population, and his extravagance and abuse of power led to instability and unrest. The empire would eventually collapse in the 5th century, marking the end of classical antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages. He wrote, "Oh, how the people were distressed! Oh, how the emperor was delighted! For it was he who had set the conflagration. With what a vast design he meditated the renewal of the city, not as it had stood, but as it should have stood, had it been his to plan and build it. For he longed to have his statue erected among the gods, and to offer sacrifice to his own magnificence." Others believed it was the work of arsonists who had set fire to the city in order to loot the burning buildings, and that he did use the rebuilding effort to further his own interests. There is no hard evidence that he actually started the fire. The accounts of what happened during the fire are often contradictory or unreliable, and there is a lot of speculation and propaganda involved. For example, Suetonius, another Roman historian, claimed that Nero had been playing with a torch in his palace. When it caught fire, and that he was so distraught by the accident that he set the rest of the palace on fire to cover up his mistake. However, this story is almost certainly false and was likely invented by Suetonius to make Nero look bad. Still, others blamed the Christians, a small but growing sect of people who followed the teachings of Jesus Christ. Christians were often scapegoated for disasters, such as the fire, because they were seen as outsiders and because they refused to worship the Roman gods. They were considered atheists by the Romans. This made Rome the largest city in the entire ancient world, and also made it one of the most disaster-prone cities on earth. At the time of the fire, and he did under return to Rome until it was almost over. When he finally arrived, he surveyed the damage and announced that the city must be rebuilt as quickly as possible. He appointed a committee to oversee the rebuilding effort and donated a large sum of money to help the homeless. And was it the work of the notorious Roman Emperor Nero? Some people believe that he had started the fire himself in order to make a profit off the rebuilding. After all, Nero was known for his greed and extravagance, and he had a long history of using his power for personal gain. For example, he had already spent vast amounts of public money on building projects in Rome, such as the construction of the Domus, a massive palace complex that became one of the largest and most luxurious buildings in the ancient world. Let's find out. During the fire, he had his mother, Agrippina the Younger, assassinated, and then used his control of the rebuilding effort to get rid of anyone who might pose a threat to his power. In addition, he began persecuting the Christians, blaming them for the fire and using their supposed confessions to further his own agenda. This city is home to some of the most iconic landmarks in history. But what many people do not know is that Rome has been destroyed and rebuilt several times throughout its long history, which had caused widespread destruction and had taken years to rebuild. But the fire that broke out in 64 was worse than any that had come before. It began in the late afternoon in the central market area before spreading rapidly through the wooden buildings. Within days, the fire had spread to the surrounding neighborhoods, leaving hundreds of thousands of people homeless. The most well-known example of this is the legendary founding of the city in 753 BC by Romulus, described the devastation caused by the fire. In graphic detail, he said the flames were so intense that they could be seen from miles away, and the smoke rose so high that it blocked out the sun. He also reported that the fire lasted for 6 days and nights, during which time entire neighborhoods were turned to ashes. Who killed his twin brother Remus, after the two of them were raised by a she-wolf? But there are many other myths and legends about Rome being destroyed, such as the story of the Great Fire of Rome in 60. This fire would devastate the Roman Empire. It all started back in 64 CE when Rome was at the peak of its power. There had already been 2 major fires in Rome during the 1st century. Flavius Joseph, a Jewish historian who lived during the time, there were rumors that the fire was the result of a plot by Nero to get rid of his mother. Agrippina the Younger, Nero himself, is said to have been in Greece. But not everyone was convinced that Nero was as concerned about the destruction of Rome as he was pretending to be. Another reason that people suspected Nero was behind the fire was that he took advantage of the chaos to seize more power. One of the most famous pieces of evidence against Nero is a series of poems that were written by a Roman poet named Tat. While it is true that Nero did take advantage of the fire to seize more power, in reality, we may never know for sure who or what started the fire. It took years for Rome to recover from the fire, and it would never be the same again. So while the fire of 64 CE is remembered as one of the worst disasters in Roman history, Rome was not built in a day, but it was built in layers. As the city grew, changed hands and fell into disrepair, it got buried under centuries of trash, debris, and new construction. There are 2 major areas where we found these mysterious sacred spaces. One was discovered under the Spanish Steps and the other underneath Lago di Tua, Argentina. In both cases, archaeologists unearthed hidden chambers beneath the streets above, and those chambers turned out to be remnants of secret temples. The soldiers in the army were drawn to the cult's message of salvation. Membership in the cult of Mithras may have been mandatory for Roman soldiers. Some scholars even believe that the Emperor Constantine was initiated into the cult before his conversion to Christianity. By the 4th century CE, there were over 20,000 members of the cult of Mithras in Rome alone. The statue of Mithras was removed and abandoned near the temple. In 90, another underground sanctuary was excavated under the ruins of the Roman Forum at the Largo di Tora, Argentina. This temple was much smaller than the one underneath the Spanish Steps. It consisted of 3 rooms entered through a doorway disguised as the facade of a house. Every time we dig down into the earth, we find another layer of history. Remember to subscribe for new episodes every week. Our modern ideas of how ancient Rome worked just don't always line up with the evidence. We think of the Colosseum as a grand entertainment venue where the public gathered to watch gladiators fight. But what if they didn't? What if the gladiators were entertainers for exclusive underground fights, not for the general public? What if the Colosseum was used for something else entirely? Inside, archaeologists found a statue of Mithras slaying the bull. The room behind that contained an altar for animal sacrifice. These same types of scenes were painted on the walls here too, depicting the birth of the deity in his battle with the bull. But there was a 3rd room at the back of the temple that was unlike the other cult chambers. It contained a small shrine dedicated to the goddess Isis, It was made from marble and depicted the god as a short, stocky man wearing a Phrygian cap and holding a spear and a shield. The statue was reused in medieval times and can now be found in the collection of the Capitoline museums. They were used for cult activities conducted in secret away from the prying eyes of the Roman public. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote about the cult and said that its rituals were blasphemous and obscene. So what exactly were they doing down there? The cult of Isis was an Egyptian cult dedicated to the goddess and her son. Horus, it was another mystery cult and had its own initiation rituals and secret ceremonies. The Romans associated Isis with magic and healing. The Romans also believed that she was a benevolent mother figure who took care of her followers. Her worship spread throughout the empire and was especially popular with women. Because of this popularity, the Romans began to associate her with other goddesses, including the Greek goddess Demeter and the Celtic goddess Danu. Both of these goddesses had associations with magic and healing. Just like Isis, it is possible that the cult of Mithras was trying to broaden its appeal by inviting members of other cults to participate in their ceremonies. Or maybe they felt that the boundaries between their gods were blurred anyway. It's hard to say without more evidence. To answer that question, we need to look at the archaeological evidence. The blood from the victims would flow through a gutter in the marble and spill onto the heads of the initiates below. They would catch the blood in bowls or on pieces of cloth to use for anointing rituals. In front of the altar, the archaeologists found a series of holes that may have held a wheeled altar. It was probably pushed forward during the ceremony and moved backward after the sacrifice. The entire room was decorated with frescoes of mythological scenes from the cult. On one wall was the birth of the god. On the opposite wall, he slew the bull. The frescoes probably helped to teach the initiates about their faith and reinforce the lessons they were learning in their classes. The temples were located in subterranean chambers under the streets above. They were designed as simple rooms with a raised platform for a statue of the god and an altar for sacrifices. The entrances were hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary shops or businesses. Sometimes the entrance to the temple would be decorated with a special stone carving of the head of Mithras, a bull or a snake. So as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. But when excavating an ancient site, there is always something new under the streets. In fact, it was literally found underneath the foundations of the Spanish Steps. The complex was huge and dated back to the 2nd century CE. Its massive entranceway led into a hallway with 3 doorways set into the walls. One led to a small courtyard with a fountain and a basin. It may have been used for ablutions or ritual purification. The second door led to a rectangular room which probably functioned as a dining hall. Here the members shared a meal before the main ceremony. The third door opened up into a long, narrow chamber. This was the sacred space. At the far end of the room was a marble platform where the statue of Mithras stood. Archaeologists also found traces of a second floor. Here, the initiates could stand around the upper level and watch the ceremony below. Today we're going to talk about Rome's lost underground temples. We know that sounds pretty dramatic, but let me explain. Ancient Rome was very public. Everything was out in the open. The Romans didn't have any curtains or doors on their houses who were the worship of Mithras dates back to the 6th century BCE and originated with the Persians. He was a god of light and wisdom, a warrior god who battled evil and slew the bull. The Romans took this figure, slapped an L on his name and turned him into a savior god. Sounds familiar. The cult was a mystery cult, which meant that their rituals were secret and only certain people could participate. The members took vows of secrecy to protect the sanctity of their ceremonies. You could just walk right into someone's living room. This is one reason why having a secret temple was so crazy. It went against everything the Romans believed in. These places had to be kept hidden because they were used by mystery cults like the Mithraic cults. We don't know a whole lot about them, but we do know that their rituals were considered scandalous and were outlawed by the Roman authorities. I'm going to focus on the Mithraic cult today. However, there was also another cult active in these underground chambers known as the cult of Isis. Mithraism started to gain traction in Rome during the 1st century CE. So why did they practice in secret? The first temple was discovered in 1938 underneath what is now the Spanish Steps. In the center of the platform was an altar where animal sacrifices were made when the cult came under attack from the Roman authorities. But that wasn't the only secret temple of the cult uncovered in Rome. Why was a goddess of another cult being worshipped in a temple of myth? We don't know. These 2 secret temples show us how much was happening underneath the streets of ancient Rome. In a sport that's often criticized for its lack of action, one senator found an exciting way to entertain his guests during the State of the Union address. That's right, a senator was spotted enjoying a blood sport while everyone else was watching the State of the Union address. But what exactly was he watching? Was it some kind of underground fight club? As the name suggests, a blood sport is a type of sporting event that involves bloodshed. Well, according to reports, the senator and his guests were watching a cockfight. These events typically involve 2 roosters that are placed in a pit and then allowed to fight to the death. And believe it or not, cockfighting is actually illegal in many parts of the United States. He's already rich, powerful, and famous enough without us giving him any more publicity. Plus, we don't want to be sued by his expensive lawyers. But we will say that he is a Republican who represents a state that starts with the letter. If you can guess who it is, will be impressed. The shocking spectator sport that was taking place in the private room during the State of the Union address. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. And remember, democracy dies in darkness. We hope you enjoyed learning about cockfighting in all its glory. We don't condone or support this activity in any way. But hey, now you know that even the most powerful people in the country have their own weird and sometimes disturbing hobbies. Just imagine the kind of events that take place behind closed doors in the homes of the super rich and famous. It's enough to make you but it seems that laws and regulations don't apply to everyone, especially those with connections to powerful people. And we don't blame you. Well, according to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or AS, cockfighting is one of the oldest blood sports in the world. It's believed to have originated in Southeast Asia and has since spread to many other countries, including Mexico, the Philippines, and different parts of the United States. In the United States, cockfighting is most common in the southern states, particularly Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. We did some research, and here's what we found. And we don't blame you. It's not something that most of us have ever seen. Here's how it works. Two roosters are placed in a pit and then they re-allowed to fight until one of them dies or is too injured to continue. The birds are usually equipped with sharp metal spurs that are used to inflict maximum damage on their opponents. And yes, there is betting involved. People bet on which bird will win the fight, and the odds are usually set based on the bird's fighting skills and previous victories. It's a cruel and barbaric practice that has no place in modern society. But unfortunately, it still goes on in some parts of the world today. Cockfighting is banned in 42 states because it's considered a blood sport. That means that the birds are fighting each other to the death, and that is not exactly what we want to see when we go to a sporting event. Plus, cockfighting is also illegal in several countries around the world, including Spain, Germany, and most of the countries in the European Union. So why is it still happening in the United States? Well, that's hard to say, but some experts believe that it is because of the demand for this cruel and outdated form of entertainment. Cockfighting is still popular in some parts of the southern United States. And there is always going to be a market for illegal activities. As long as there is money to be made. It is a sport in which the participants engage in violent physical confrontations that often result in injury or even death. Perhaps he's just a fan of the sport. After all, cockfighting has been around for centuries and is popular in many countries around the world. Or maybe he was simply looking for a unique way to entertain his guests. Whatever the reason, he certainly found a way to shock and disgust those who found out about his little spectator sport. Now, we're not talking about boxing or mixed martial arts here. After all, it's not like it's a major political scandal. Well, that's true. But we think it's important to talk about these kinds of events for a few reasons. First, they give us a glimpse into the bizarre and often hidden world of elite Washington, D.C. power brokers. Let's face it, if this cockfighting incident had happened anywhere else, we probably wouldn't even be talking about it. But the fact that it happened in a place where lawmakers gather and make important decisions gives it a whole new level of intrigue. Second, it reminds us that even the most powerful people in the country have their own weird and sometimes disturbing hobbies. We often see senators and other lawmakers as larger-than-life figures who are always in the public eye, but they're just regular people with regular hobbies. And finally, it's just plain interesting. Who doesn't love a good gossip session? And let's face it, this cockfighting incident is definitely something that people will be talking about for years to come. We're talking about something much more extreme, something that takes place in a private room behind closed doors. And let's face it, if these events were taking place out in the open, no one would bat an eye. There are plenty of violent sports that are widely accepted and celebrated across the world. But when they're happening behind closed doors in a private room, things start to get a little murky. The answer might surprise you. You see, the room that this senator retreated to isn't just any ordinary room. It's a special room, a room with a purpose, a room designed for one thing: watching sports. That's right. This senator and his guests were able to watch their favorite teams play in a private room complete with comfortable seating and a big screen TV. But what kind of sports were they watching? Was it football, baseball, or basketball? Well, not quite. The senator and his guests were watching something much more exciting, something much more brutal, something that would make even the most hardened spectators squeamish. They were watching a blood sport or maybe a gladiator match. Well, we can't say for sure because there are some things that even we don't know. Some things that no one knows. What happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. But luckily for us, there are plenty of clues to go off of here. And after piecing them together, we have a pretty good idea of what this secret spectacle really was. So get ready to be shocked, disgusted, and maybe even a little bit entertained yourself. Because we're about to tell you all about the craziest spectator sport ever seen at the State of the Union address. Before we jump in, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Let's start with the basics. Where did this senator go to watch his secret spectacle? According to reports, he retreated to a private room in the Capitol Visitor Center, which is located just a few blocks away from the U.S. Capitol building, where the State of the Union address was being held. Now, this isn't just any old visitor center. It is a place where tourists and lawmakers can take a break from the hustle and bustle of Washington, D.C. and learn about American history and democracy. But apparently, it's also the perfect place to catch a glimpse of a shocking spectator sport. So what exactly is going on in this private room? But what exactly is a blood sport? But what kind of blood sports were being watched in this secret spectator sport event? But why would a senator want to watch a cockfight in the first place? It's hard to say. Now, you might be wondering why we're even talking about this cockfighting incident in the first place. Now, we're not going to reveal the name of the senator who was involved in this incident. Now, you might be wondering why cockfighting is illegal in many states, but how common is cockfighting really? And finally, you might be wondering what actually happens at a cockfight. Thanks for watching.